At my MIL's 60th birthday dinner, my daughter held my hand and asked, "When can I stop taking the magic vitamins?" I gently stroked her hair. "Honey, there is no magic. That stuff only exists in movies." Beside me, my husband Theodore and my MIL went rigid. "No, Mommy, the white ones from Granny's locked box," Zara said, gripping the chair. "She gives them to me when you're at work, Mommy." "I don't understand," I said slowly. "It's our secret," Zara said weakly. "Grandma says if I tell you, they won't work anymore. But I'm sick of them, Mommy." Mackenzie clutched her purse. "She's confused. What is she talking about?" My voice cut through the house. "Just some vitamins. For immunity." "Then why is it a secret?" The pieces started clicking. Her mystery illness. The liver failure doctors couldn't explain. "Let me see them. Now. They're harmless." I grabbed her purse, dumping it. Receipts scattered everywhere. "What are the pills for?" I demanded. "They're just to help," Mackenzie started. "Help with what?" My mind raced as I thought about the last 2 years of hell they put me through. "The CPS calls." Theodore dropped his fork. "That was because of you. None of the mothers believed me when I said I didn't know what was going on with Zara. They all thought I was abusing her." Mackenzie's face was stone. "I didn't know about—" "You stood right there." "I quit my job," I continued, tears streaming. "Senior marketing manager at my dream job. 15 years building my career, gone. Because someone had to be with her full-time from a disease that was caused by you." I laughed bitterly. "We lost the house. Had to sell it to pay medical bills. Now we live in your basement like prisoners. Our son doesn't even know me anymore," I said. "Elijah drew a family picture at school last week. Want to know who wasn't in it? Me." I looked at Mackenzie. "Yep, while you charged $400 a month to your credit card for pills from Thailand." "She almost died," I said, my voice breaking. Zara rubbed her temples, whimpering softly. 3 times. Do you understand that? 3 times I held her hand while machines kept her alive. Theodore finally spoke. "Mom was just trying to—" "You knew?" I whirled on him. The guilt on his face confirmed everything. "You knew she was poisoning our baby? What are these pills for?" "They're just supplements, calm down." "She had a seizure in my arms," I said. I glanced at Zara. Her lips had a slight blue tinge now. "In the grocery store. People thought she was dying. I thought she was dying." Zara started crying. Her words came out slurred. "I'm sorry, Mommy. Grandma said if I'm pretty, Daddy won't leave us for Ashley." The room went silent. "What did you just say, baby?" "Grandma promised," she sobbed, swaying dangerously on her feet. "She said when I'm white enough, Daddy will love me and won't leave like he wants to." White enough. Everything clicked. "They're skin-whitening pills," I whispered in horror. I turned to Theodore. "Who's Ashley?" His face went gray. "She's nobody. The one from your LinkedIn? Regional manager at your company?" My voice was rising. Zara's right hand had started twitching uncontrollably as I handed her a plushie. Theodore's phone buzzed on the counter. He lunged for it, but I was faster. "Text from my MIL sent just now. Don't let her stop treatment now. Dr. Kim says we're close." I scrolled up through the messages. "Increased dose. She's responding well. Skin is definitely lighter." I took a deep breath. "You're coordinating this? Both of you?" Suddenly, Zara's eyes rolled to the back of her head. She collapsed, her tiny body convulsing on the floor. "Zara!" I screamed, dropping to my knees. She was seizing violently, foam tinged with blood coming from her mouth. "Stay with Mommy, sweetheart." "I've got you." The door burst open. Our son Elijah stood there in his pajamas. "Is Zara dying again?" His voice was flat, emotionless. My 7-year-old son had seen this so many times it didn't even scare him anymore. "Call 911!" I screamed at Theodore, who stood frozen. "Call them now!" I turned Zara on her side, timing the seizure. The blood was getting darker. "I'm calling the police!" I reached for my phone, but Mackenzie grabbed my wrist. "No, you can't. Look at her skin, it's working. She's so much lighter than before." I wrenched away, but Theodore caught me from behind, his arms tight around me. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, but we're doing what's best for her. For our family and reputation." With strength I didn't know I had, I broke free and lunged for my phone. But Mackenzie got there first. She snatched it and dialed 911 herself. "Hello? Yes, come quickly, my granddaughter is having a seizure. Her mother has been giving her black market skin-whitening pills." I screamed at her to tell them the truth, but she kept talking into my phone, telling them I'd been ordering pills online to hurt my daughter. My baby was still shaking on the kitchen floor, her little body jerking in ways that made my stomach turn. I counted the seconds like I'd learned from all those other seizures, watching the foam at her mouth turn darker with blood. Theodore just stood there frozen while Elijah watched from the doorway with that same empty look he always had when this happened. Mackenzie kept lying to the operator about finding pill bottles in my room, making up details about how she'd been worried about me for months. I grabbed for the phone, but she turned away, still talking about how I'd been acting strange and hiding things. 2 minutes into the seizure now, and Zara's lips were turning blue. I stayed on my knees beside her, keeping her on her side so she wouldn't choke, my hands shaking as I held her head. The operator must have asked something because Mackenzie said yes. She was still seizing. Yes, there was blood. 3 minutes and I heard sirens getting closer. Mackenzie finally hung up and looked at me with this cold expression like she'd won something. The paramedics burst through the door with their bags and equipment, dropping down beside Zara immediately. They asked what she took while one of them started an IV in her tiny arm that was still twitching. I told them about the skin whitening pills from Thailand, how my mother-in-law had been giving them to her in secret for 2 years. The paramedic's face changed when I said Thailand and skin whitening, and he called something to his partner about possible heavy metals. They gave her medicine through the IV to stop the seizure while I explained about the liver failure the doctors couldn't figure out, the mystery illness that had almost killed her 3 times. Mackenzie tried to interrupt, saying I was confused, but the paramedic ignored her and kept working on Zara. The seizure finally stopped after what felt like forever, and they lifted her onto the stretcher. Theodore grabbed my arm when I moved to follow them, saying we needed to get our story straight before the hospital. I yanked away from him so hard he stumbled backward. Mackenzie tried to climb into the ambulance too, but I told the paramedic she wasn't allowed near my daughter, that she was the one who'd been poisoning her. The paramedic looked between us and must have seen something in my face because he blocked Mackenzie from getting in. She started yelling about being the grandmother, about her rights, but he radioed ahead about a possible poisoning case and closed the ambulance doors. In the ambulance, I held Zara's hand while they hooked her up to monitors and gave her more medicine. Her hand was so small and cold in mine. The paramedic asked me to write down everything I knew about the pills, when she took them, how many, what they looked like. I remembered Theodore's phone with all those messages from his mom about dosing and Dr. Kim. I told him about the texts I'd seen, how they'd been coordinating this together, planning when to increase the dose. He wrote everything down while his partner drove fast with the sirens on. Zara's eyes were closed, but she was breathing better now, the blue color fading from her lips. We got to the hospital and they rushed her straight to the emergency room where a doctor was already waiting. Dr. Colin Pierce took over immediately, calling out orders for blood tests and something called a toxicology screen. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I'd managed to take of Mackenzie's texts about the dosing schedule. His face went pale when he read them, and he told the nurse to call poison control right away. While the nurses worked on getting Zara stable, putting in another IV and attaching more monitors, I told Dr. Pierce everything. The 2 years of her being sick with no explanation, the liver failure that came out of nowhere, the seizures that started 6 months ago. I explained about the secret pills Mackenzie had been giving her, how Zara said they were supposed to make her white enough so Daddy wouldn't leave for Ashley. Dr. Pierce's jaw got tight when I said that part. He ordered tests for heavy metals immediately and said they needed to check for mercury poisoning. He explained that illegal skin whitening products from Thailand often had mercury in them, and the symptoms matched what Zara had been going through. The hospital security guard showed up because Dr. Pierce had flagged this as a potential criminal poisoning. I still had the bottle of pills I'd grabbed from Mackenzie's purse when I dumped it out. The guard put on gloves and took the bottle, putting it in a clear plastic evidence bag. He wrote down the time and date on a form, then had me sign it as a witness. He said they'd need to document everything for the police investigation. About 20 minutes later, Theodore and Mackenzie showed up at the hospital. I could hear Mackenzie in the hallway telling anyone who would listen that I was the one who hurt Zara, that I'd been giving her dangerous pills. The security guard went out to deal with them, and I heard him tell them they had to stay in the waiting room. A police officer arrived and came to take my initial statement about what happened. I told him everything from the beginning, about Zara mentioning the secret pills, finding out they were for skin whitening, the text between Theodore and his mother. When I mentioned Ashley's name and explained what Zara had said about the pills keeping Daddy from leaving for her, the officer's expression got hard. He asked for Theodore's phone, but Theodore claimed he'd left it at home, which was a lie because I'd seen him put it in his pocket. The officer wrote that down too. Christina Montes from the hospital social services knocked on the door and came in with a folder and a concerned expression. She introduced herself and said she needed to assess the situation since there was a poisoning allegation involving a child. My stomach dropped when she said CPS would have to be notified, knowing that Mackenzie had already tried to frame me with that 911 call. Detective Silas Ramey showed up about an hour later with another officer, and they separated all of us right away. He took me to a small conference room down the hall, while his partner took Theodore to another room and left Mackenzie in the waiting area, with a hospital security guard watching her. Detective Ramey had kind eyes, but he was all business as he set up his recorder and pulled out a notebook. I showed him my phone with all the screenshots I'd managed to grab of Mackenzie's texts about the treatment, and Dr. Kim and his face got really serious as he scrolled through them. He took photos of each screenshot with his own phone, and then called someone about getting a warrant right away. While we waited for the blood test results, he asked me to walk through everything from the beginning, and I told him about the 2 years of Zara being sick with no explanation, and how the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. He wrote down every detail about the seizures and hospital visits and the liver problems that came out of nowhere. About 20 minutes into our talk, Dr. Pierce knocked and came in with a folder and his face was grim. The blood tests showed really high liver enzymes and signs of heavy metal exposure, which he said matched perfectly with mercury poisoning from skin whitening products. He explained that these illegal pills from Thailand often have mercury and other banned stuff in them, and the levels in Zara's blood showed she'd been getting them for a long time. Detective Ramey asked Dr. Pierce to document everything for evidence, and then his partner radioed him that there was a problem with Theodore. We rushed back to find Theodore in the bathroom trying to delete stuff from his phone, but the security guard had caught him and was holding the bathroom door open. Detective Ramey took the phone right out of Theodore's hands, and Theodore started crying and saying he was just checking work emails, but the detective wasn't buying it. He put the phone in an evidence bag and said they'd get a warrant to search it properly. But even just looking at the screen that was still open, I could see messages between Theodore and his mother. The detective took Theodore back for more questioning, and about an hour later, Jade Fisher from CPS showed up with a thick folder that had our family's name on it. She was younger than I expected, but really professional as she sat down with me and Christina Montes to go over everything. She pulled out records of all the previous CPS reports that had been filed against me over the past year and started going through them one by one. She noted that the medical evidence from today clearly showed I wasn't the one hurting Zara, and that the timeline of the poisoning matched when Mackenzie had access to her. She asked me about our living situation, and I explained how we'd lost our house and had to move into Mackenzie's basement, which made her write a lot of notes. A nurse came to get me because Zara was waking up, and I ran to her room where she was crying and looking around confused. She reached for me and kept asking where Daddy was, and when I told her he couldn't see her right now, she started sobbing harder and saying she was sorry she told the secret about the pills. I held her while she cried, and the nurse checked her vitals and gave her some juice to sip. From down the hall, we could hear Mackenzie yelling and causing a huge scene in the waiting room. She was demanding to see her granddaughter and screaming that I was turning everyone against her, and that she was going to sue the hospital for keeping her away. The security guards had to physically pick her up and carry her out while she kicked and screamed, and they told her she was banned from the hospital property. Detective Ramey came back and said he needed to interview Theodore again because the phone evidence was really bad. He showed me just a glimpse of the text chains they'd found, and there were hundreds of messages between Theodore, his mother, and someone saved as Dr. Kim talking about doses and results, and how Zara's skin was getting lighter. Theodore tried to play it off as just vitamins at first, but when the detective showed him the evidence and explained the criminal charges he was facing, he broke down completely. He admitted he knew about the pills but swore he thought they were just harmless beauty supplements, and that his mom had told him they were safe. The detective wasn't impressed and kept pushing until Theodore admitted he'd been worried, but didn't want to upset his mother or deal with the conflict. Meanwhile, Mackenzie was in another interview room with Detective Ramey's partner, and even from down the hall we could hear her going on about how she was just trying to help Zara be more beautiful. The detective told me later that she'd said mixed-race children need enhancement to succeed in life, and that she was doing us a favor by making Zara white enough to save our marriage. She actually used those exact words. White enough, and the detective had to document it all as evidence of her racist motivations for the poisoning. The forensic toxicologist arrived the next morning with the official report on the pills I'd grabbed from Mackenzie's purse. She confirmed they had mercury and a bunch of other banned substances that are common in illegal skin whitening products from Thailand, and that the levels in Zara's system showed she'd been getting them for months or maybe even years. Detective Ramey had been working all night to track down Dr. Kim through the phone number in the texts and finally found him. Turns out he wasn't even a real medical doctor, but just some guy who sells illegal beauty treatments online. And he'd been coaching Mackenzie on how much to give Zara for over a year with detailed instructions about increasing doses when the results weren't fast enough. Detective Ramey handed me Theodore's phone since it was unlocked, and told me to look for anything about Ashley while he stepped out to make calls. I opened his email, and my hands shook as I scrolled through months of messages between them. Ashley had written back in March about not wanting to get involved with someone who had such a complicated family situation. Another email from May said she couldn't keep waiting for him to leave his wife. Theodore had replied that his mother was handling things, and soon I'd be out of the picture once CPS took the kids. My stomach turned as I read email after email where he promised Ashley they'd be together once his mom fixed the problem with Zara. Jade Fisher from CPS arrived while I was still reading, and she pulled me aside to explain they were creating an emergency safety plan. She said based on the evidence and medical reports, I'd get temporary sole custody immediately. Theodore would only get supervised visits at a facility, and Mackenzie was completely banned from any contact with both kids. The paperwork took forever, but Jade stayed with me the whole time, helping me understand each form. Meanwhile, the hospital pharmacist came to examine the pills from Mackenzie's purse more closely. She identified them right away as a banned product from Thailand that's known for causing organ damage in kids. She took photos of the packaging and secured samples in evidence bags for the police. She told me these specific pills had mercury compounds that were outlawed in the US back in the 90s. Detective Ramey called me over to show me what else he'd found in his investigation. Mackenzie had been getting monthly shipments to a P.O. box she'd rented 2 years ago. The import records showed she'd spent over $10,000 on these pills, ordering them under different names to avoid detection. He had copies of wire transfers and shipping manifests that proved she'd been doing this since right after Zara's 3rd birthday. A woman knocked on the door and introduced herself as Emmeline Graham, a therapist the hospital had called in. She sat with me next to Zara's bed and asked how I was holding up. I couldn't even answer at first because everything was hitting me all at once. She explained that we'd need to talk to both kids about what happened in ways they could understand without making them more scared. She said Zara would need help processing why Grandma hurt her, and Daddy let it happen. Then I broke down completely and told Emmeline about the drawing Elijah made at the school. The one where I wasn't in the family picture at all. I sobbed as I explained how he'd drawn Theodore, Mackenzie, Zara, and himself, but left me out completely. Emmeline held my hand and explained that Elijah's emotional numbness wasn't because he didn't love me. She said watching his sister almost die over and over had caused him to shut down emotionally to protect himself. She called it a trauma response and said he'd excluded me from the drawing because he associated me with all the scary hospital visits. Theodore showed up at the hospital demanding to see me privately. He grabbed my arm in the hallway and said we needed to keep this a private family matter. He actually tried to convince me that taking this to court would hurt the kids more than what his mother did. I pulled away and told him he'd chosen his mother and his mistress over his daughter's life. He kept saying he was trying to protect our family's reputation, but I just walked away. The next morning, Mackenzie's lawyer called the hospital and I could hear the administrator arguing with him on the phone. The lawyer was threatening defamation lawsuits and demanding access to Zara's medical records. Detective Ramey overheard and told me not to worry about any threats. He said the evidence was overwhelming and no lawyer could make this go away. He'd already talked to the prosecutor who was confident about the criminal charges. That afternoon, the heavy metal panel results finally came back from the lab. Dr. Pierce sat down with me to explain that Zara's blood showed dangerous levels of mercury. He pointed to the charts showing how the levels matched gradual poisoning over 2 years. He said this confirmed everything we suspected about the timeline, and proved Mackenzie had been poisoning her since she was 3. The mercury had built up slowly in her system, causing the liver damage and seizures. Jade Fisher had been working all day on the emergency custody paperwork, and finally got it in front of a judge. The judge signed immediate no-contact orders that legally banned Mackenzie from coming near either of my kids. And Theodore got restricted access, which meant he could only see them during supervised visits at a court facility. The orders were effective immediately, and would stay in place until the criminal trial was over. My phone buzzed while I was sitting next to Zara's bed watching her sleep. Theodore texted frantically that cops were tearing apart his mother's house right now. I stared at the message for a second, then deleted it without responding. Detective Ramey had mentioned getting a warrant earlier, and I figured this was it happening. I pulled Zara's blanket up higher and stroked her hair while machines beeped around us. About an hour later, Detective Ramey called to update me on what they found. He said they discovered Mackenzie's locked box hidden in her bedroom closet with 3 more bottles of those pills inside. There was also a handwritten ledger where she'd been tracking every single dose she gave Zara for the past 2 years. The ledger had dates and notes like, skin getting lighter, and increased dose next week, written in Mackenzie's handwriting. They also found printed emails from Dr. Kim with detailed instructions about how much to give based on Zara's weight and age. The emails went back 18 months and showed Mackenzie asking questions about side effects that she clearly knew were dangerous. Detective Ramey said this was solid evidence for the prosecution, and they were building a strong case. After hanging up, I decided to reach out to some of the moms from Zara's school who had called CPS on me over the past year. I sent messages explaining what really happened, and how Mackenzie had been poisoning Zara, while making it look like I was neglecting her. Most of them were shocked, and several apologized for jumping to conclusions about me. One mom named Sarah called me crying and said she felt terrible for believing Mackenzie's lies. Then Sarah forwarded me something that made my stomach drop. It was a group text from 6 months ago where Mackenzie was spreading rumors about my neglect and mental instability to all the school moms. She'd written things like how I was too depressed to care for my kids, and how she was worried about their safety with me. Reading those messages, I realized she'd been setting me up as the fall guy all along, in case anyone discovered what she was doing to Zara. The next morning, Dr. Pierce sat down with me in Zara's room to explain her long-term prognosis. He said with proper treatment she should recover from the mercury poisoning, but she'd need monitoring for years to make sure her organs were healing. He explained there might be some permanent liver damage that wouldn't show up until she was older. He also said she'd need blood tests every month for at least a year to track her mercury levels going down. I asked about brain damage and he said the scans looked okay, but we wouldn't know for sure until she was back in the school. He recommended keeping her on a special diet to help her liver heal, and gave me a list of foods to avoid. 3 days later, I had Jade Fisher serve Theodore with divorce papers during his first supervised visit with the kids. The supervisor told me later that he broke down crying when he got the papers, but still kept insisting he was just trying to keep the family together by going along with his mother's plan. He apparently spent the whole visit trying to convince Elijah that Daddy still loved them, even though he couldn't come home anymore. Elijah just sat there playing with blocks and barely looked at him. The custody hearing happened 2 weeks after that, and Theodore's lawyer tried to argue for joint custody. But when the judge asked Theodore directly about the text messages, he had to admit under oath that he'd been having an affair with Ashley for 8 months. His credibility completely fell apart when he tried to claim he didn't know the pills were dangerous, even though the prosecutor showed texts where he discussed side effects with his mother. The judge looked disgusted and gave me full temporary custody, with Theodore only getting 2 hours of supervised visits per week. That same day, Ashley sent me a message on Facebook saying she wanted nothing to do with any of this mess. She claimed she didn't know about the poisoning, and said Theodore had told her we were already separated when they started dating. She mentioned that everyone at their company was talking about the scandal, and she was transferring to their Chicago office to get away from it all. She ended the message by saying she was sorry for my pain, but she was a victim too because Theodore had lied to her. I didn't bother responding. Detective Ramey called me the next week to tell me about his phone interview with Dr. Kim, who was still in Thailand. Dr. Kim claimed he only sold nutritional supplements, and had no idea they could be dangerous for children. But Ramey said prosecutor Damon Wallace was working with international authorities to file charges against him for selling illegal drugs. They'd found evidence that Dr. Kim had been selling these mercury-laced pills to parents all over the world. Meanwhile, the medical board opened their own investigation into whether any real doctors in our area had helped Mackenzie get prescriptions for Zara. They discovered she'd been using a pill mill 2 towns over to get prescription medications in Zara's name without ever bringing her in for exams. The doctor at that clinic was already under investigation for other issues, and this just added to his problems. 2 days after that conversation with Detective Ramey, I was sitting in Zara's hospital room checking her monitors when the nurse rushed in and told me security had caught someone trying to get into the pediatric ward dressed as a volunteer. My stomach dropped when she said it was an older woman matching Mackenzie's description, who'd been asking which room her granddaughter was in. Security brought me down to identify her, and there she was, wearing a pink volunteer vest she'd stolen from the lobby, clutching a teddy bear and flowers. The security guard already had the police on the way since we'd filed the no-contact order. Mackenzie started screaming that I was keeping her from her baby, that she had rights as a grandmother, that the pills were helping. The officers arrived within 10 minutes and arrested her right there in the hospital lobby, while visitors stared. She spent that night in county jail before Theodore bailed her out the next morning for $5,000. That same afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. But when I heard Pearl's voice from my old marketing job, I started crying. She'd seen the news coverage about the poisoning case and couldn't believe what had happened to me. Pearl listened while I explained everything, from losing the house to living in Mackenzie's basement, and she immediately started making calls. Within 3 hours, she'd found us an emergency housing voucher through a domestic violence program since poisoning counted as abuse. The next morning, Pearl picked up Elijah from the school and drove him to help me pack our things while Zara was still in the hospital. We grabbed clothes, toys, important papers, everything we could fit in Pearl's SUV and my old sedan. Theodore wasn't home, but Mackenzie stood in the doorway calling me ungrateful, saying I was destroying the family, that Zara needed her treatments. Pearl recorded everything on her phone for evidence while helping me carry boxes. The apartment Pearl found was small but clean, just 2 bedrooms in a complex near the hospital. Elijah helped me set up Zara's room, carefully arranging her stuffed animals on the bed and taping her drawings to the walls. He picked the spot for each toy, making sure her favorite bunny was right where she could see it from bed. The landlord waived the deposit after Pearl explained our situation, and neighbors donated furniture and kitchen supplies. After 2 weeks of IV treatments and daily blood tests, Dr. Pierce finally cleared Zara for discharge. She'd lost 8 pounds and looked so fragile, but her mercury levels were dropping. The discharge nurse showed me how to care for her port since she'd need blood draws twice a week for monitoring. Zara clung to my shirt the entire ride home, whimpering whenever we hit a bump. That first night in our new apartment, she woke up screaming about the white pills, begging me not to make her take them. I held her while she sobbed, her little body shaking, until she finally fell back asleep, clutching her bunny. 3 days later, we had our first session with Emmeline, the family therapist CPS assigned us. Elijah sat on the opposite end of the couch from me, playing with a stress ball while Emmeline asked gentle questions. When she asked about the family drawings without me, he suddenly burst into tears. He said he stopped putting me in pictures because he thought I was going to die from being so sad all the time, and if he didn't draw me, maybe I wouldn't disappear. Emmeline helped him understand that leaving me out of drawings didn't protect anyone, and we practiced talking about scary feelings. After the session, I spent the entire weekend organizing evidence for the cases. I spread everything across the living room floor, sorting medical records by date, printing text messages, organizing receipts. The stack grew to 3 inches thick, each page representing another day of Zara's suffering. I made 3 copies of everything, 1 for the prosecutor, 1 for my custody lawyer, and 1 for our records. Pearl helped me create a timeline showing how Zara's symptoms matched the shipment dates of pills from Thailand. Detective Ramey called Monday morning to tell me the prosecutor was filing charges. Mackenzie faced attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges that could mean 15 years in prison. Theodore was charged with child endangerment and conspiracy, which carried up to 5 years. Ramey said the evidence was overwhelming, especially the ledger tracking doses and Mackenzie's notes about skin lightening. Theodore's first supervised visit happened that Thursday at the CPS office. I watched through the observation window as Zara sat frozen on the couch, gripping her comfort plushie so tight her knuckles went white. Theodore tried to engage her with toys and books, but she barely looked at him, only giving one-word answers when the supervisor prompted her. The supervisor wrote extensive notes about Zara appearing fearful and withdrawn, which my lawyer said would help our custody case. Theodore kept trying to hug her, but she pulled away each time. The emergency custody hearing took place the following week in family court. The judge reviewed the evidence for 40 minutes, his face getting more disgusted with each document. When he saw the text about making Zara white enough to save the marriage, he actually shook his head. He granted me full temporary custody immediately, limiting Theodore to 2 hours of supervised visits per week at a CPS facility. Theodore's lawyer tried to argue for unsupervised visits, but the judge shut him down fast. That afternoon, I opened the hospital bill and nearly threw up when I saw $43,000 for just this hospitalization. Pearl came over that night with her laptop and helped me apply for victims' compensation funds through the state. We filled out applications for 3 different charity care programs, and Pearl contacted the hospital's financial advocate about payment plans based on income. The advocate sat with us for 2 hours going through every single form and option available. Pearl took notes on her phone while I signed paper after paper, my hand cramping from all the signatures. 3 days later, Jade Fisher called me with news that made me cry right there in the grocery store parking lot. She said CPS had finished their investigation and found 0 evidence of abuse or neglect on my part. She went through their findings slowly, explaining how the medical records clearly showed the poisoning started before any of the CPS reports were filed. The reports themselves followed a pattern that showed someone was deliberately trying to frame me. Jade actually apologized for the system failing us, saying they should have seen the pattern sooner. She promised to send me official documentation clearing me of all allegations which would help with custody court. I sat in my car for 20 minutes just sobbing with relief while Zara and Elijah ate goldfish crackers in their car seats. That same week, I got a call from Damon Wallace, the prosecutor handling the criminal case. He told me Mackenzie's lawyer had reached out about a possible plea deal. She was willing to admit guilt to child endangerment if they dropped the attempted murder charge. In exchange, she wanted probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment instead of prison time. Damon said it was ultimately my decision as the victim's mother, but he thought we had a strong case either way. I told him I needed to think about it and talk to my own lawyer first. Pearl surprised me the next morning by forwarding an email from her company's HR department. They had a part-time remote marketing position open, and Pearl had recommended me for it. It wasn't anywhere close to my old senior manager role, but it would let me work from home while taking care of Zara's medical needs. The interview was over video call, and I did it while the kids were at their therapy appointments. The hiring manager remembered me from a conference 3 years ago and offered me the job on the spot. The pay was less than half what I used to make, but it was something. I started the following Monday, setting up my laptop at the kitchen table after getting the kids breakfast. We slowly built new routines over the next few weeks. Every morning started with Zara's medications, carefully measured and recorded in a logbook the hospital gave us. Mondays and Thursdays were therapy days for both kids. Tuesdays, Zara had blood draws to check her mercury levels. Wednesdays were for grocery shopping and laundry. Fridays were Theodore's supervised visits at the CPS office. Our dinners became quiet affairs with just the three of us. No more walking on eggshells around Mackenzie's moods or Theodore's guilt. I started reading to both kids every night before bed, something I hadn't done in over a year because I'd been too exhausted from Zara's medical crises. Zara picked the same princess book every single night and would fall asleep clutching her bunny while I read. Elijah pretended he was too old for bedtime stories, but always found excuses to sit on Zara's bed while I read. One night, Zara actually smiled when the princess in the story saved herself instead of waiting for a prince. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in months. About 6 weeks after we'd moved into our apartment, Elijah's teacher called me. She said he'd drawn a new family picture during art class and wanted to make sure I saw it. When I picked him up that afternoon, she handed me the drawing with tears in her eyes. There I was in the center, holding both kids' hands, with huge smiles on all our faces. Elijah had written at the bottom in his careful printing that his mommy saved them. His teacher said he'd spent the whole art period working on it and telling the other kids about how brave his mom was. I ugly cried right there in the classroom while Elijah hugged my legs. Theodore started his court-mandated parenting classes the following week. The judge had ordered 12 weeks of classes plus individual therapy focusing on his enabling behavior. His supervised visits with the kids continued at the CPS office with a social worker taking notes. He'd started to accept this was his consequence for what he'd allowed to happen. During one visit, he actually admitted to Zara that he'd been wrong to let Grandma give her the bad medicine. It was the first time he'd taken any real responsibility. Zara didn't respond, but the supervisor noted it in her report as progress. 2 months after the initial arrest, Mackenzie's lawyer called Damon again. She was ready to take the plea deal and admit guilt to child endangerment. The agreement included 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service at a children's hospital, and mandatory counseling specifically addressing her racist beliefs about skin color and beauty. The judge would have to approve it, but Damon thought it would go through. Part of me wanted her in prison, but I also wanted this over, so we could move forward. I told Damon to accept the deal. The next week brought shocking news from overseas. Dr. Kim had been arrested in Thailand after one of his other victims died. The investigation revealed he'd been selling his poison to families in 12 different countries. Dozens of children had been hospitalized, and at least 3 had died from his treatments. The Thai government agreed to extradite him to face charges here since we had the strongest case with all the evidence from Mackenzie's messages. His arrest made international news, and suddenly my phone was blowing up with interview requests that I ignored. A few days after the news broke, I got a Facebook message from a mom named Sarah whose daughter was in Zara's class. Her son had special needs from a genetic condition, and she wanted to know if I'd like to meet for coffee. She said she understood what it was like to navigate the medical system with a sick kid. We met at a small cafe while the kids were at the school and talked for 3 hours. Sarah gave me a binder she'd made with resources for special education services, therapy coverage, and support groups. But she introduced me to an online group of moms dealing with medical trauma in their families. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel completely alone. The hospital billing department finally called with good news the following week. Between the Victim Compensation Fund Pearl helped me apply for and the Charity Care Program, they'd managed to reduce our bill from $40,000 to $8,000. They set up a payment plan of $200 a month with no interest. It would take years to pay off, but we wouldn't lose everything. The relief was so intense I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. We weren't financially stable by any means, but we were managing. My part-time job covered rent and groceries. Theodore's court-ordered child support covered the kids' therapy, and the payment plan for medical bills was actually doable. Pearl helped me set up a strict budget, and even started a small emergency fund with $50 a month. It wasn't much, but it was something. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later, and I signed them at the kitchen table while the kids ate breakfast. Theodore getting 2 hours every Sunday at the CPS office with someone watching everything he did. He kept texting about wanting to see them alone, but the judge's order was clear. 12 weeks of parenting classes plus 6 months of therapy before they'd even consider it. I drove to the courthouse on a Tuesday morning and sat in the back row while the judge made it official. Theodore agreeing to $800 a month in child support, though he kept asking his lawyer if we could discuss unsupervised visits. The judge looked at him over her glasses and said, "Not until he finished every single requirement," and I walked out of that courthouse knowing my kids were finally safe. Spring turned to summer and Zara's blood tests kept getting better, the mercury numbers dropping every 2 weeks until Dr. Pierce showed me a chart where the red line finally dipped into the green zone. He ran his finger along the graph explaining how her liver was actually healing itself, the damaged cells replacing themselves with healthy ones. Though we'd need to check every year for the rest of her life just to be sure. The mailman brought a thick envelope from Mackenzie's lawyer one afternoon. Her court-ordered apology letter that I opened alone after the kids were asleep. She wrote 4 pages about how she was trying to help, how she didn't mean any harm, how the counselor was helping her understand her mistakes, but not once did she actually say sorry for poisoning my daughter. I folded it back up and stuck it in a box in the closet where the kids would never find it. Theodore's visits started changing around month 4, when he actually got down on the floor to play blocks with Zara, instead of just sitting in the chair watching. The supervisor wrote notes about him asking Zara what she wanted to do instead of telling her, about him admitting to her that Grandma's pills were bad and he should have stopped them. Zara still wouldn't let him hug her, but she did show him her drawings and he started bringing her new crayons every week. My old boss called one morning while I was making lunch, asking if I'd consider coming back part-time remote. Not my senior position, but a decent marketing coordinator role with benefits. She said she never believed the rumors, knew something else was going on, and the position paid enough that we could move to a bigger apartment. I started the next Monday, setting up my laptop at the kitchen table, finally having real insurance again after almost a year of state coverage. Elijah's Thursday therapy sessions became the highlight of his week when Emmeline taught him to punch a special pillow when he felt mad, and he started telling her about the nightmares where Zara turned blue. She had him draw pictures of his feelings, page after page of black scribbles that slowly turned into houses with people inside them. One afternoon, I heard him and Zara playing pirates in their room, actual laughing instead of the quiet tiptoeing they'd done for 2 years. I stood outside their door listening to them make up adventures about treasure and sea monsters. No mention of hospitals or pills or being sick. We went back to see Dr. Pierce on a Thursday morning 6 months after that awful night, Zara sitting on the exam table swinging her legs while he listened to her heart. He pulled up her latest lab results on his computer, turning the screen so we could see all the numbers in the normal range. Her weight finally where it should be for a 5-year-old. He actually smiled. A real smile, not the worried doctor face I'd seen for 2 years, telling us she was thriving. Her skin its beautiful natural color that made her look like herself again. Saturday morning, I woke up to little feet padding into my room, both kids climbing under my covers with their stuffed animals. Elijah turned on cartoons while Zara snuggled against my side, and we watched talking dogs solve mysteries while eating dry cereal straight from the box. During a commercial, Elijah looked up at me with those serious 7-year-old eyes and said the words I hadn't heard in over a year. We weren't perfect. The medical bills still came every month, and Theodore still texted about wanting more time. And Mackenzie still sent letters through her lawyer, but right there in my bed with both kids safe and getting better, we were exactly where we needed to be. Thanks for hanging out and exploring all this with me today. Really made it more interesting to go through together. Until we meet again. Subscribe for more content like this.